Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Whitney Museum of American Art. My name is David Breslin, and I'm the DeMartini family curator and director of the collection. I'm also with my two great colleagues, Jenny Goldstein and Rue Hockley, the co-curator of An Incomplete History of Protest, selections from the Whitney's collection 1940 to 2017. That's on view on the 6th floor. And if you have a chance to see it, it won't be open later, but I recommend coming back some other day to see it. And it's on that occasion, and on the occasion of Edgar Heap of Birds' inclusion in that exhibition with a great drawing from 1987 as part of his American policy series called Relocate Destroy, in memory of Jews, in memory of Native Americans, that we've asked Edgar to come and speak about his work, and we're thrilled that he's able to do that and be here with us this evening. And thank all of you for coming. I just wanted to introduce Edgar, and then he will be talking about his work for about 30 minutes. Then he and I will have a brief conversation, and then we're really interested in opening it up to the room for conversation. So Edgar's work, as you know, blends politics and poetry, poignancy and power, and his work is deeply and equally inflected and indebted to the history of contemporary art, the histories of Cheyenne and Native American cultures, and the lived present of his life and the lives of indigenous peoples. Edgar received his Master's of Fine Arts from the Tyler School of Art, Temple University, and his Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Kansas in Lawrence. He has exhibited works at many places. I'll just name a few: the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Whitney, the National Museum of the American Indian, the Smithsonian Institution, at Documenta, at the Bandung Institute of Technology in Indonesia, at the Grand Palais in Paris, and at the Venice Biennale. He's been at the University of Oklahoma since 1988, and he teaches in the Native American Studies program. His seminars there explore issues of the contemporary artists on local, national, and international levels. Larry Rinder did an exhibition of Edgar's work in 1992, and he has this really beautiful short description that I thought might be a great way to set up part of the conversation tonight. He wrote, "The work of Hock v. Edgar Heap of Birds is an expression of self-location, a generous, deliberate, and when necessary, critical articulation of the artist's identity within the context of language, society, geography, family, and history. His work ranges from agitprop-style public art pieces, which forcefully assert the presence of a Native American voice within contemporary social discourse, to more modestly scaled works which use language, color, and gesture to evoke moments of personal remembrance." More recently, there's been a wonderful book published by Bill Anthus of a monograph dedicated to Edgar's work that I really recommend checking out if you haven't had the opportunity to. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Edgar and thank him for being here.
Thanks for the welcome. And I put together a brand new talk tonight for this occasion, and I want to go back into the kind of the nucleus, the beginning of my practice at Kansas, University of Kansas, and even before that, in a sense. But I'll dedicate the talk tonight to Black Bear Boson, Francis Black Bear Boson, who was one of my mentors, and his work actually goes into the Whitney in this very amazing act of karma. But he was the man that really helped me as a leader and an instructor in a sense of being an artist in Wichita, Kansas when I was a kid. And then in '77, he was featured in the Anti-Catalog, which was published in protest against the Whitney Museum. So it's kind of interesting to have this protest agenda, and Black Bear was part of that years ago. So this is the slide of Oklahoma, and my work tonight will be about the context that I find myself in, and we find ourselves in. And so the verticality, the horizontal, the prairie, the land, the flatness of the land, that's where I locate myself, and it's influenced me even without knowing it. So it was part of that kind of experience. And this is looking west from Oklahoma City. My wife Shanna took this picture, and my daughter plays in the park right here. This is Black Bear Boson, and he was a Kiowa Comanche member. He was from Anadarko, Oklahoma, and he became an artist probably when he was in the Army, the service. He was actually ill, and he was dropped off on the way to the Asian theater of war, the Pacific theater, and he had his first show in Hawaii, where I've shown recently as well. But he came back to the States, and he moved from Oklahoma to Wichita, Kansas. He worked in aircraft factories, and he made wonderful murals and a big sculpture in downtown Oklahoma City. This is his painting that was actually in the anti-catalog. So the anti-catalog was published by Artists for Cultural Change. You might check that out. It's really a pretty amazing document. The bicentennial exhibition here at the Whitney was called something like Art of America. And of course it had one woman in it, and didn't really represent America too well, right? So the anti-catalog people came forward and maybe they picketed or whatever, but Black Bear's painting was featured, and part of it was this kind of really wonderful, beautiful relationship the fire has with the people, the animals, the land, and everyone's fleeing the fire in a sense. They have the same hierarchy. There's not a high and low experience of these spirits, and even the fire is beautiful too. So it had this presence that everybody liked, and that was in New York City. And Black Bear never even knew about it. I don't think. Maybe he was already gone at that time, but they really found his work important. This is his mural that he did in Wichita, Kansas. You can still see this mural. It's in a bank in downtown Wichita, Kansas. And he told me he wanted to make a bunch of these murals. He wanted to make a handful, he told me. And I was a kid in the studio, and he would show me what he was working on. Unfortunately, he died when he was 57 years old, and he never got to make another mural, So he made this piece about the spirit coming from the center, so the Godhead, and then on the right, you have more of the prairie life, the buffalo, and on the left, you have the Southwest area of life there too. That's about the Navajo Hopi kind of connection together there. So that first slide I showed you, the horizon. I went into making paintings at the University of Kansas. I was probably like a junior in college. This is one of my first paintings, 1970, maybe 74, 75. And of course, I just worked from that perspective or the vision of the flatness. And I went to school in London after that, and they called me a neo-constructivist, when I went to London. And I knew about De Stijl and Bauhaus, but I wasn't really about that. I was more about the prairie and the line that you find there on the prairie. I also made serigraphs. That painting was 6 by 6 feet. I made serigraphs also. This is one of the more successful pieces. And we did our own prints ourselves and so forth. And this was kind of a combination of the planes coming together, but that was coming out of my grandmother's beadwork and a lot of the angular nature of what I saw in the home, During that time, I think it was the 75 time, the year in a sense, I also made an acquaintance. He's a Delaware artist, and his name is Don Secondine, and he was also from Anadarko. He married a woman from Anadarko, and he was from near Tulsa in Oklahoma. And we took a landscape painting class, and it was pretty interesting. We went out every other day to do landscape painting with this sort of suburban truck and stuff, but we didn't want to paint on easels, so we didn't want to really make landscape paintings. So we made earthworks instead of landscape paintings, and everyone else was painting from easels. His mother-in-law died, and she was Kiowa, just like Black Bear, and so he had the idea to make a memorial. And so we got a tree, like a dead tree, and then we dug a big hole, and we painted the tree. And then at the top, he had some horsehair. He made false face masks, and we put the horsehair at the top. But I want to show this because it really had a really strong moment, and I think it led me to other things, and it was very subliminal. And I make memorials all the time now, but this is like in 74, 75. I think it had a strong presence. So we put it on the prairie, and we just walked away from it. We put cedar in the center, and we put stones around it. So I felt like it has a real strong presence. My next phase of work transitioned into basically dumpster diving, I guess you could call it. I did a lot of work with materials I found behind a laundromat, and so I was the visceral sensibility of what I found in terms of materials was so important to me. And then I would just find other materials to combine. But I was always about this beauty and this organization and this geometry that I look back and see as somewhat of a hint back toward that horizon. And this is about maybe 8 feet across. So this is when I was a senior in college, I think, maybe. And it was pretty cool. We had a visiting artist program at Kansas, really good one. Like Miriam Shapiro came out, Jim Nutt came out. And one day Al Levin came out, and he saw these works. And he said, Edgar, I can't tell you how to make them any better. Just keep working. Keep you're doing good. And I'd see Al later, and we'd show together here in New York and elsewhere. This is one that had some interesting materials. Some in the center that's actually carpet padding and sort of the sensuality of the materials too, but still having this geometry holding it together, the horizon line and so forth. I call them constructions. And my favorite one was this one here, and it actually was going back about 3 feet from the front of the piece. And I'm going to show you. This is actually a doghouse. So there's actually all kinds of materials I found, a platform. This is rope coming in and out, tar paper. So I really almost made them like almost like stage sets, and I learned a lot about how to create a space. And I think a lot of the time when I do solo shows and museums. We really kind of have a space sensibility, and people miss the work when it leaves because we offer something with the space. And I learned that, I guess, from working on these constructions. I had a big hallway in an old Army barracks on the Kansas campus, and I worked on either side of the hallway. And they became even more fluid, so a lot of plastic materials here, and going onto the floor here as well. And it was a tough transition from the painting to the constructions, but it's always about the discovery, and I think that's what we all do as artists. We're always trying to discover, investigate. And as a kid, in college, I really just followed my desire to investigate the work, and that was the last one I did. And these are all trash pieces, and of course, I moved so many times. Where do they end up? In the dumpster, so they all got thrown away. So they're gone. But after this, I've been in Kansas. I went to London to Royal College of Art. But, of course, Oklahoma was always the place that the tribe was so important for me. And this is Mount Scott, my son's photograph, Wookgim. And the tree would become a very important form. You'll see in the paintings in a few minutes. But it's really a wonderful view looking sort of southwest from southern Oklahoma. As I came back from London, I was very, very confused in a sense. I found, in a very odd way, the British Empire was so oppressive, but it brought so many great people to the UK. So my friends were colonial people, like from Malta, Africa, Hong Kong. And I got to see in the Middle East, and I got to meet artists that were from all over the world, and so identity even became more principal to me, and my investigation of that identity had to be conducted. And I grew up in Kansas with people like Black Bear, but I hadn't been on the reservation, very, very intensely, and so I moved right back to the reservation area for the summer, and I would later come to Philadelphia to study at Tyler. But I spent the summer with my grandmother in Clinton, Oklahoma. And so this is a moccasin pattern. So the moccasins are right here, and they go into this is the toe part of the moccasin right there. So that's how the tribe would create their imagery. But again, it comes from the mountains. It also comes from, these are mountain shapes here. And this is a woman's moccasin also here. So I made a print at a Cheyenne Art Festival on the reservation, And this is the print, a serigraph I took, I created on the reservation. So it was something I kept from my grandmother, something I really was guided by, but I didn't know where it would take me. I didn't know what to do about it. But I did want to copy this and take it with me. I didn't want to take her moccasin with me. I wanted to let her keep her moccasins, and she beaded them for sale and stuff too. But I do have some left over from my mother too. But it was something very important to have this image. And at Tyler and the School of Art in Philadelphia, at a studio downtown. And then I worked also at the campus in Elkins Park. I was, again, a bit confused, so you have to work your way out of that. What will be your agenda? What will you be investigating? And these are, you can see the kind of the printmaking imagery that I had earlier. These shapes, like the prints I did here, had a series of them together. I did it in London, actually, the shapes themselves. And then this is the beadwork. So you can look back to the beaded piece. So this kind of structure here goes into the painting. This is a gouache on paper here. So my thesis would be, as I looked at the work, would be to have the shape sort of like a Stella-esque construction shape, which I really have a lot of admiration for his work, Frank Stella. But his vision and my sort of geometrical abstraction, they would have a fight with the Cheyenne beadwork. And then whoever won, I'd go with them, And they had a big fight, and the Euro guy's losing, as you can tell. He's getting tinier there. So I used more beadwork and whatnot. And then from that point, I went into being very much more politicized, and kind of grasping at political agendas and identity questions. And who would show up at Tyler? Vito Acconci, And there's Vito kind of hauntingly peeking out from one of his masks. He did a wonderful mask piece. This is Terminal, New York. I'll show you that a little bit later in Brooklyn. And we would show together, and this would be like 1978, and in 1983 we'd be in the same show together, me and Vito Acconci. So as a kid at grad school, he was my hero because he came and did a talk in the evening one time. And he just blew us all away with just how you can talk about sensuality, sexuality, identity, power. And some students in the college said, he's not an artist. That's not even art. They were so mad about it. So he kind of divided the school in half in a way. But it really gave me a lot of license to go forward, to be more adventurous with the content. And so this is one of my drawings near that time. And so I'm into basketball. I go to the Thunder games, if you know the Thunder, Oklahoma City Thunder. But I also went to the Sixers. So there's the Sixers there in Philadelphia. And then a teepee pennant, Stars and Stripes, like a flag. And so I would just start putting all these things together as a collage, and then dealing with my own interests, basically, which it sounds like a really simplistic stance, but as an artist, you should have your own interests and pursue them, right? That's like, rather than a stylistic thing or whatever. So this is indicative of my work at that point, trying to find its way. This is graduate school, almost done with graduate school. And probably the pivotal moment was my thesis show at the Tyler School of Art, my MFA show. And it was a lonely moment, and it was a big transition for me to finish the years, and it was very difficult. Of course, there was no artist of color to teach the graduate program, and it was very, very, kind of contentious times. And then when I mounted my thesis show, the chair of my thesis said, "Oh, I understand now," So he got educated really well from my thesis. But it was for me, though, for me. And I would learn that, well, that's how you do things, I guess. But as part of the walls in the gallery with having my work up, I put my names on the wall, my family name. So the moccasin, the lady that made that moccasin years and years ago, her name was Howling Crane. So there's different, many magpies, I think is up there. Yeah, many magpies. So Heap of Birds is really many magpies there. And so I had the work on the wall, but also had my names. So my family couldn't come to the show, but their names were there. So the text started becoming very important. And this is the last piece I did on the East Coast as living here. And it was just above Midtown, down in Tribeca on Franklin Street. You might remember that. And it was probably like maybe 81 or 1980. And it was a wonderful show. Anna Mendieta was in the show, Dowd Bay, David Hammonds, many great artists. And we're all like young artists working. But I made this piece, and it's a very satirical piece, and it deals with the confusion or the expectations. So it appears to be a glossary, and people like that. They want to have things explained to them all the time, especially with native things, like tell me the secret, tell me the coyote story, right? And so here's all the animals, the coyote story, but they're not these things. These are animals. And you think this is like a passage of Shoshone and percussionist. So I made a big joke out of it, and people thought they were learning Cheyenne, down in Tribeca, And that was my last piece, and I took it off the wall, put it in my Volkswagen bus, and drove to Oklahoma and moved away from here. And the curator said, "We'll never hear from you again. Why would you ever want to go to Oklahoma?" And that wasn't the case. So here's Oklahoma. Here's the red dirt, and I went out there to the canyon and lived there for 10 years, my great-grandmother's home. And the land, of course, spoke to me. And it wasn't easy. It was very difficult, but you didn't fit right in. It was tough to make the transition. But I came back. Jane Dixon was with us last night. Jane's in the show here. And she created this project called Messages to the Public from the computer billboard at Times Square. And so I made a piece from Oklahoma, and it just describes that white man is Viho, is also a spider, and Tatistas is Cheyenne. So I made this for the Times Square. And again, David Hammond's from the show, in the project, and Keith Haring was also in the project. That's Terminal New York, the military terminal there in Brooklyn, and we did a big project there, and that's where Vito was. He had a show there too. He was in the show, and then this was the Death from the Top, and a whole piece about the massacre with Colonel Custer in the Ouachita River. And I made this piece in Oklahoma. So my point here, certainly, it's not like Oklahoma's far away and New York's a hierarchy. I'm just back and forth over years of time, decades, and I'm going home tomorrow. So, and the trees were very important. Hunting, hiking, with the juniper trees. And if you look at this tree and kind of see it more like on its side, it started to speak to my painting. And there's some of the Noof series paintings. So I have a painting practice I'm very involved with as well. And I painted in Maine on Bar Harbor for years in the summers too. This is a barn in Bar Harbor. And that's a newer painting. This is a show I have right now in Minneapolis. And since the trees were important, just subliminally, I also go into the snorkeling into the tropics of the world. And this is off of Bali. So I've been working in Bali and Java and Sumatra a lot. And so these paintings have a link, I think, with the vision of just what you see under the ocean. But it's not like a seascape painting, but it's just something in your mind, the blue places. And then, of course, going home, very much saturated into the leadership of the Warrior Society, the Elk Society. Bowstring is also an RTP. And then being a student of the Earth Renewal for 16 years, dancing 16 years. And that's the medicine wheel and the science behind the medicine wheel. Then, of course, you have the lodge. So here's the medicine wheel, and then so this is the lodge that is built every summer at solstice. And so each one of these spokes is a rafter here. So now I'm an instructor in the ceremony, in the practice. So the most important thing I do is involved with that structure. And so these trees the fork tree is my piece in Denver called Wheel. It's an outdoor 50-foot piece, medicine wheel, on the same locations of the wheel in Wyoming where that first diagram came from here. And it's 12 feet tall. It's got a frame underneath the ground, 4 feet. Porcelain and steel. 10-year project and kind of autobiographical, but going from what you might call prehistory in southern Utah with the Ute Nation and Anasazi forward to AIM movement, Wounded Knee, and then now to be more in charge of your own destiny as a practitioner. And then in the ceremony, and then of course is my daughter Desba. So just there last winter, and showing her about it. So it's about that transition forward to your children as well. And then I work in Asia a lot. So I was just in Singapore doing a project, and this is a wonderful poster they made for me in Beijing. So I was in Beijing and made one of the best posters I've ever had made for me with the trees. Wonderful. I work on the nation too with elders, and so this is a wonderful transition of the medicine wheel into a painting. And we had 250 elders working together one day in a cultural center on the reservation. And my mother was there, my sister was there. The best day of my life was working with the elders on the reservation that day. And we had 250 canvases and acrylic paints, and they catered it all, and people had a wonderful time that day. I was so proud. The Venice Biennale in 2007, I did a project about Buffalo Bill's warriors who came and died as part of his Wild West tours. And they toured over Europe. And this is a piece actually coming back to American policy and how the Jewish citizens are suffered. And the ghetto word comes from the foundry in Venice, and they made cannon there. And when they condemned the cannon-making factory, they put the Jewish people inside of it, And so I sort of made that linkage again with natives coming from America, and they were abused as well. That's my son Woogim, who made the photograph of the tree. And then back to the land again. So I'll be home tomorrow, and so again, this red rock, the photograph we have in Art in America was taken on this red rock as well. So it's a place I have a lot of spirit there. And American policy, made many years ago, and there are 30 drawings. So the piece in the show is one of 30 out of that project. And it was in Documenta, the drawing was. I show this also with Declan McConigal at Orchard Gallery, the Foyle Arts Center in Derry, Northern Ireland. It was also at the Nelson Gallery in Kansas City. It's traveled the world, and it's back home in my studio now. But that's the real spirit of the whole piece, that you'll see the drawing in the gallery here. And moving against earth, a very aggressive drawing behavior there. When I hit the paper, the pastel splits across the room. So I have hundreds of pieces of pastel, but I don't make them anymore. But I made them for about 10 years. Uterine hats in Sand Creek, when they killed the native women, the Cheyenne women, they were so destined to obliterate the Cheyenne tribe. They cut the uterus out, wore them on their hats, the cavalry. So that's sort of the blue and yellow as the cavalry colors, and uterine is the green, the wonderful renewing presence all women have. And Relocate Destroy, and again the same issue with the Jewish citizens. And when you first get relocated and gathered, that's a very ominous sign. And so the next step is they'll destroy you then. So that's what happened with the native people all across the nations, across this hemisphere. And the current issue of Art in America, October, and we flip America backwards. So we want to have America see itself in a different way and see its history more clearly. So we have this presence created right now on the cover. And we want to have the kind of responsibility to be representative of the reality and not to be catering to styles and identity cards. So we have Don't Dance for Pay. So, all right, thank you.
Thank Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Edgar. One question, I guess I'll start big, since why not? When you look at the work that's in the show upstairs from 1987, and you think about that work in the context of an exhibition, thinking about the history of protest, how do you see your work? How do you see your work changing, the way that you have worked as a model of protest? How do you see the world changing around your work? And in some ways, what is it like to see the work framed in the context that we have for the show?
Well, it's interesting going back to the anti-catalog, and I read some of it just the other day, and the way they talked about protest and the way to get more diversity and leadership in museums and all these things and values that are more diverse, and so that's still a very good challenge. You know,
Yeah.
But in '77 it was a challenge, and so it's still a challenge, and the Whitney's doing a lot better with it, I think. But around the globe, you know, it's still a big challenge. So a lot of the work we do, the things we protested and to continue to protest, are still valid.
Yeah.
Grievances, or we need to educate people about it, and that's what you do, is educate people. So hopefully the work is always about that when it's a public piece or the drawings and so forth.
Yeah. I mean, what I find very interesting, and when we tour the show, our great colleague Rue really thinks about, you know, what happens when artists think about intersections between groups, commonalities, the idea
Right.
of kind of an alliance or allegiance. And how do you think about that in the work? Because obviously you deal with particular histories, localities, peoples, places, but this is a work you're really thinking between peoples.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the first step always, is to be like my Native Host series, you know, about that. And
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the metal panels. I didn't show any today, but metal panels, and it says, like I did them at City Hall Park when Mayor Koch was mayor, and so New York backwards, reversed, like America on this here, flipped. And then today your host is Shinnecock, today your host is Mohawk. And I did that in '88, and I've been doing them all over the continent, and I have 12 permanent pieces in Vancouver, and the museum in Anchorage just acquired 12 in Alaska. I was in Alaska last year helping represent Native tribes, and so of course the first step is when you go somewhere, or you're anywhere on this globe, and you have to be humble enough to acknowledge your host wherever you are, rather than you're going to go in there and be the main feature or the government or whatever, but the tribal entity. And so it's been kind of a popular initiative because it's so needed everywhere.
Yeah.
You go somewhere and no one even acknowledged all the Alaskan tribes when you land at the airport, or sort of here's the mayor of Anchorage, or here's the governor, or whoever, but not the tribal people that have been there for 20,000 years.
Yeah.
And so that's my first initiative. So that sets up respectful dialogue, you know, and I continue to do things. And I was up there, and they gave me a bunch of eagle feathers. I went to this guy's studio, and he gave me 2 wings of eagles, and he said, "You like eagles?" And of course, our tribe worships the eagle. So I got all these great feathers, but it was just that kind of respect of exchange, and then Sumatra was just there the other day too. So that's something that was wonderful, to exchange with artists in Sumatra, weavers that made wonderful pieces of fabric, and so it's that kind of exchange and honor that I think is important.
Yeah. What I find so interesting about your work is the way that, you know, you're really thinking about particular histories, and yet there's a lot of emotion, and there's a lot of kind of the affective element of being human that goes into it. I wonder how you think about these two things, and obviously they don't have to be separate, but so frequently they are: the didactic, the pedagogical, and the kind of the heart of a work of art. And you know, even when you talk about the breaking of the pastel, even thinking about that mark making as an effort, but then using words that obviously come from particular historical moments. So how do those two things work? Because there are a lot of pieces that you do that you really want to deal with the fact of the situation.
Yeah.
And there are other pieces that you do, like the Neuf series, which would be great to hear more about, where you can view that abstraction and color and kind of the use of the number 4 within the Cheyenne tradition really play out. So I wonder how how these two work out in your
Well, it's all about the multiple ways you live your life, I think, and to be honest about your own identity. And the Euro art model of the genius is always a messed up thing. Like it's, the genius makes this thing, then the market wants to peddle it. So then it has to have one kind of idiom to sell it, right? And that's why I'm tough to collect too. It's like I have so many things I do, but they tend to represent me, or my interests, or my priorities. And so I just follow the things that I think I should be involved with. It's like being a professor, or being a father, or being a son, or you are too. We're all these many things, but will society let us be who we're supposed to be? And of course, you're more effective if you take on all those other things and be a contributor. And so my practice is the same way. I'm really compelled to do drawings. I still do drawings. I'm making these prints, and then I do the abstract things too. And I really am fascinated by that. I saw some Aboriginal paintings yesterday at the Met. There's wonderful abstract pieces up there at the Met. There are 4 new pieces, and wonderful. And then it informs me, and then I'm able to give it back. So it's just part of, I guess, being true to your own multiplicity, I would say. And you're going to feel better about yourself if you can participate.
Yeah. I've some interviews that I've read that you've done, you really speak beautifully about public art pieces and not really caring if people know if it's art or not, because at the point that you recognize it, who cares if they're paying attention to the work? Could you talk about how that kind of working in public kind of developed when you're thinking about that?
Well, the first piece was, while I was at Times Square, I did that piece with Jane Dixon in our language, but also the work in '88 with Mayor Koch's office, which was censored actually. They said there was too many Indians around his office. They didn't like it. Like it was like a circle of the wagons or something like that. So we had 12, and then they said you can't have 12, and then Public Art Fund said we're going to go fight for you, Edgar. They said you're going to have 8 now. So I lost 4, but and so I put them up anyway. The 8 I guess I had, but it was just that once they read it, then you've already won the battle. I mean, they've internalized it. Yeah. So they've started to grapple with that, and flipping the word around backwards. They've traveled a different place because they've seen their place backwards. Hopefully, art in America too. They see America different now because look at it, and it's everywhere. So maybe America should look back differently at its past now, and so that's what I hope to communicate with a lot of the native host pieces, and again they still seem to be necessary. So I still make them. I have some in Minneapolis too. It's a project supporting renaming these lakes, to more native-based text, and so I really feel like it's great to have the authority to pretend you're in charge of these things, and then you just put it out there, and they believe it because it's a sign. Yeah. Like, they believe the propaganda, and then we all stop at the stop sign. Oh, whoa, we gotta stop. So here I am all over the place, and people say, I don't know what that was. There was some stuff up there that was like, I don't know, it was blue Alaskan things, and
I mean, you've also talked about the public art projects, and maybe even more expansively about your other work as being kind of a puncture, and you used the description of within the Cheyenne tradition, the sharp rocks.
Okay.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about that, because I thought that was a beautiful part of Bill's book.
Yeah, that's nice. And that's on the Red Rock, and I was out there for 10 years, and I didn't have any money, and didn't have a job, or I was just living on the land, but I had a shotgun, and I would hunt for food, but I would kind of just want to be walking in the canyon too, to enjoy my dogs being there, and I would find arrowheads. I would sit and rest, and I rested in this vista, and then I looked down at my feet, and there were arrowheads sitting down there, sort of broken ones, half-made ones. Then I realized the hunters before sat there. They liked the view. They were tired, They were hunting, and then that the arrowheads, and they were really sharp. You almost could cut yourself with them. Yeah. And they could be very old. And so that was very, very, provocative that they had a tool that was still sharp and effective, but you couldn't shoot people with it now, and you couldn't shoot them with a gun now. You had to do other kind of, tactics. And so then being an artist, public art, becomes a way to make that same sharp tool, and then you want to make a puncture to let it in, and so just make a start. And that's a lot of my work is sort of a first puncture to Native history.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so effective to see the work both in public spaces, but then in the gallery itself, to see those two words. You know, when you think relocate and destroy in one place, there's this power to it that does kind of open that room up to a reading that it might not have had. And I wonder how, obviously in the gray piece that you showed from 1981, 1982, there's kind of a joke at work. In other places, you're really mining different histories. In other pieces, you're probably working from an unconscious, just kind of a reacting to language. So could you talk a bit about the American policy piece and what language kind of came to that work?
Yeah. I make a lot of little small drawings, you know, with markers to start to filter all the emotions, you know, and desire and history, and I'm always working. And now I use my phone. I have like a Samsung 8. I get it out right. I wrote stuff at the Met yesterday. So you know, so I'm thinking these ways, and I capture them, and then I have a place to put them. It'd be on my studio, on my wall, and then back then I would put them onto pastels. You know, so that's how it kind of became. It was like an inventory, an archive in a sense of these ideas, and like America, how it just handles this history and sort of the paradox of it. Like one day I was landing on, I do all flying, you know, so I landed on a runway and there was a big hawk sitting there by the runway. So I was this big jet and there's a hawk. So it's like tarmac hawk or something. It's one of the pieces. And so I thought that bird, you know, and then I did a piece up here in the Bronx at one of the garden places. What's that place called in the Bronx? It's an arboretum or something. But anyway, Wave Hill. Yeah, Wave Hill. So, and then I really love the whole thing about the plane crashing in the Hudson. I love that. That's my favorite thing in the world. Like that the birds asked the plane to land, and it did. And it was a big plane, man. It's a big plane, you know, Airbus, but it had to land. And these geese that land, so it landed. And so that kind of thing about the bird and then the plane, and so American Poly has some of that too, about the land and the technology, and kind of how it clashes together too. Yeah.
Well, the question about land, and I think it's really related also to language, is the question of sovereignty. And do you think land and language together? Are these two things that you think separately, or does kind of channeling language allow you to have a different relationship to land, or talk about a relationship to land that you might not otherwise have through abstraction or photography in other ways?
Well, the sovereignty, land, it's the spirit, you know. So being in the ceremony and being cold and being hot, being thirsty for years, you know, like living in the prairie, it's like a really hot place, and then water like really precious, and you don't have it anymore, or you don't have plumbing or something, and or you bathe in the pond, you know, or you try to bathe underneath your eaves, but the water's too cold from the rain. It's too cold to bathe from. So it's like all those kind of things, you know, and then you get spirit from that, from where your knowledge is. Then the spirit makes the drawings, and it can use words or whatever, but the land gives the spirit, I think, too. If you listen, it can give you the spirit to make the work.
Yeah.
The land comes first.
Land comes first.
Yeah.
Okay.
My recommendation.
Well, I think that was so, effective in your presentation to see the photographs of the land come back. And I think what's interesting when we think about the life of an artist, the life that you have, in some ways is itinerant, but it always comes back. Mm-hmm. And the itinerant part isn't the main part, it's the coming back. That's the real thing.
I've always lived there. I never lived downtown.
Right. Well, we're glad you're downtown here with us tonight.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we have time for questions if you're
definitely.
open to some.
You bet. Or reactions or whatever.
My question is, do you think of, I have two questions. The first is, do you think of your work as protest first and then an expression of your experiences second? And the second question is, what do you expect from your audience as far as their reaction to your work, or if there is any expectation at all beyond just academic discussion?
Oh, yeah. Well, the first part of your question, To me, we're say the word protest here, but we have the show and whatnot. But I see it more like defense. I defend the native world. I mean, that's my, and I'm in the Warrior Society, so that's always our first duty. You got to defend, and you're on the front. Everyone else is behind you. So whenever I'm anywhere, we got to defend indigenous priorities first, and even the art practice, and I don't know if it bothers me, but I lose a lot of other parts of my personality because I give so much to that. But that's what we got to do. So I see the public art pieces and those kind of American policy, the drawing installation, 30 drawings, and even this cover of the magazine. That's defense of Native people and all indigenous people. So that's what I think it is, and I guess it can be seen as protest if you're on the other side of the window. But I think we're defending the people, and the land, and then as far as what I'm hoping to see, I hope people can actually engage the work on all kinds of different levels. Enjoy the beauty of the new series, or the lyric behind that motion, and or even the monoprints are more personal and sensual, and some are really funny too. And I did a whole series on native gaming just recently. It's up in Minneapolis, and they're just names of all the casinos, and it's really a funny group of things. It's like what the white people think they want to see when they lose their money. They have to have all these funny names of Indian things, that they like. So I did made a whole series of prints with Indian names of casinos with nothing with the Indians. So a lot of it's humorous, and so I hope they get a laugh out of it too.
I hope I'm not diverging too much, but I really like the way you're playing with the words, and then also the way you're presenting this other part of your more emotional side and more abstracted side. And then I started wondering about the history of the written word in the Native American culture, and then using the written word as a tool to communicate these ideas. I just started going further back, and I was wondering if you thought about that at all, or if I'm just kind of going even further away from anything.
Well, there's I didn't show the piece, but there's a piece called Fort Marion Lizards I made. Actually, I think I made it in Philadelphia, in my studio, and we showed it here at the Native American Center back in, I don't know, '79. But it was a list of all the prisoners of war who were taken from the prairie after the Washita Massacre. Colonel Custer attacked the tribe, and they were put in prison in Florida. And then that's where Many Magpies came as part of that. It was Many Magpies. The man had all these birds together. Then it was Heap o' Birds. Then Heap of Birds came. Then after that, his son became Black Wolf, or Alfred Heap. He had a surname, first name, last name. But it left Cheyenne and became English. And so I did the piece about all their names and how that was the battle they fought, or just the language, when their language changed from Cheyenne to English, and still broken up in a sense, and even renaming everybody too, So that's why I use Hockieavy. That's my Cheyenne name. That's Hockieavy. So David said Hockieavy. He had to say Cheyenne words. And that brings it back. And he asked me, "Do you want me to say that word?" "Yeah, you did say that word." And so
I want to make sure I said it correctly.
He did pretty good. And so that brings us back to the indigenous part of it. So yeah, the language is, again, it's almost like the sharp rock. It's like another weapon that you got to get used to it and spin it back. And Native hosts, the way this is backwards, and someone talks about it, and the critic talks about it as, which side of the glass are you on? The wrong side or the right side? And if you're on the right side, it looks good. If you're on the wrong side, it looks backwards.
Yeah.
And, so those kind of things. So I think, the language is a bit of a weapon that way too.
I was just wondering what your opinion is of white male American artists who went into the land and made land art pieces in the land in the 60s and 70s, in relation to what you were saying about the land and beginning with the land.
Well, that's a tough one there, man. That's a tough one. Well, I would hope they would do. Well, they probably didn't, but I would hope they would have done something with the tribes to ask, before they dug the earth up. I mean, that I do. I have to go, even though I'm native. I can't think I'm in charge of something in Alaska or Vancouver. I have to go ask them, give them an offering and ask them, is this something we can do? And there's an individual creative act that all artists have their materials. But anything you do with this planet, I think you got to have some kind of respect for the indigenous people. And I worked in Northern Ireland, and I worked a lot in Australia, and I worked in Zimbabwe and South Africa, and I'd have to go and try to meet with people and try to kind of mediate what is proper, I guess, about my own creativity, or make an exchange rather. I think that's what my main premise is whenever I go international places, I always try to offer something before I take something, and make something, and that's probably a new kind of process, but it could be one that's useful for everybody. They do earthworks that way, Yeah.
Just to interject one quick thing, because I found it so interesting, your discussion of defense in relationship to war, and is this kind of a modified reading of how you think of war? Is it kind of come from the culture that defense comes before offense, or is it a reading that you've kind of developed when thinking about how your work kind of functions within the different places where it's put in context?
Well, the offense. I mean, that's a good question. The power is so stilted, right? So
absolutely.
We don't have any off. We can't.
Yeah.
We'd be like look at Standing Rock. They were gone in the day, or something. And so the power you can't really. That's why I use the power of the institution. I flip it, push it back on itself. I pretend to be the institution, and then their power becomes my power.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my offensive. But we're so outnumbered. So defense is what it takes. But then on top of that, though, I have to say, certainly more important than that is to be not to do this, and to be a caretaker and owner of that spirit place, and learn it, keep it, help all those that are doing it. That's the first and the last thing you ever do. So as we live on, and there's a lot of discussion about identity and Native identity in America, but like I say in the interview in this magazine, if you have a card that says you're Native, in 50 years, if you don't take care of the fire, that card won't mean anything to anybody. So who's taking care of the fire? Who's taking care of the elder that prays every day? Who's helping them get the wood? Who's being an intern to learn the prayers? Who's learning the songs? So that's what you really need to be doing, or you have nothing to defend. So it's having that kind of challenge, but also then you got to defend it too.
Yeah.
But you got to be in there trying to preserve it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to break up. Are there any other questions?
You mentioned that you teach at university and that you've also done community programs.
Can you hold the mic a little bit?
Sorry.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you teach at a university and that you also have done community programs, and I just wanted to ask if you'd speak a little bit about how your work in education has played into your artistic practice.
How I work with indigenous programs?
In education, in general.
Well, I work with what I was just talking about with the ceremonial aspects. The circularity is kind of at the center of that in an abstract way, and so I did that for about 10 years in schools in Oklahoma. I traveled all over, and I was an artist in residence before I became a professor. And I learned how to be a communicator, I think, working with like kindergartners, first graders, and stuff. And but I would give them this idea of the circularity, reciprocity of your actions come back to you. So you want to offer good things, so good things come back to you. You can tell it to a kindergartner; they understand. Their neighbor, not your neighbor, neighbor's not to you, but that's a big thesis that everyone should have, and So I have a lot of circular projects that I work with, but the medicine wheel is more specific to the tribe, and so I can go to the tribe, and the way things go, if you're older, but you don't mean you know everything, so you can be an elder in the tribe, but you don't know where the spirits live and how the equinox moves and solstice, and so I'm there to kind of just guide people to learn that, but I also give them, if I'm in a good space, which I was that day, I made the people that paid for it buy everyone sweetgrass, so I had like 300 hanks of sweetgrass, and they're waiting to get it. Like, can we get our sweetgrass? No, make your painting first. Like, they want the sweetgrass now, and it could be something that they're going to go give to someone that's prays. That maybe they don't pray, but they give it to their nephew, or they'll have it ready for them, So I can kind of give them this precept of the circularity and the planets, and their universe, and then you give them the article to actually ignite it, or to begin it with the prayer with the sweetgrass, and then maybe not that day, but sometime it can actually become initiated, So that's my perfect storm for activity,
Edgar,
Yeah.
it's funny that you brought up Jane Dixon today, because actually at our Whitney curatorial meeting, we're talking about her and remembering what fantastic work she did. And you brought up this show at the terminal that she organized and you were in. And I'm just curious whether you see an evolution from the time of that show to the time of this show, of your work now in your practice. I mean, do you see it? Has it changed fundamentally? Is there something that you were doing then that was your purpose that's different than your purpose now?
Yeah, well, the time has been good for me in the sense of learning more about the traditions in the nation, and so I'm pretty well informed now about what things mean, what's above us and what's below us, and before I wasn't, I had honor toward it, but I didn't really own it. I didn't possess it. So over the last 30 years, I've been able to be educated by it. And what I have seen, though, I did a show with at LAX Art in LA just recently, and it's kind of funny, but I'll tell everyone that they say they're going to do a group material kind of thing now. It's like a phrase, So we've become a phrase, like a buzzword, and it was cool. And they did a whole thing where they did Reconstitution, and we did a show called Constitution here, and then they had Reconstitution like 30 years later in LA, but they painted the whole building in Farsi with the Constitution, asking, is this everyone's Constitution? And then all the gallery space was Farsi on the wall, and then my prints, Genocide and Democracy, were on top of the Farsi, too, these red bloody prints, and it was a great show, and group material those days was still the spirit of this protesting spirit, or this aggressive spirit about politics and identity and diversity. So now it's kind of creeping back into the dialogue, which I think is just pretty interesting. It was gone for too long, though. Yeah.
There's
Up
a
there,
question in the
up,
back, yeah.
Is Alexandra up there? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, I'm Alexandra.
Yeah.
It's more of a comment than a question.
Good.
I think that your work is really enlightening, especially at a time today. And, just thinking about places and where we all go, and New York, being New York, the respect that you have for the past and the reverence of your people, that maybe if we all take a chance to think about the places that we go to or where we are in the moment, and think about it in that way, and to make those connections, because I think even people that show up, gentrification happens, right? But that when people show up to just acknowledge what happened in the past, and what's the connection to you and your place, and I don't know, your work just speaks to me in that way of really like reaching back and being in the moment, but also just always remembering and not forgetting where you are. But not for your work, but just for everybody, I think it's really important. That was just more of a comment of my reaction to your work. Anyway.
Well, I feel like that's very important, and how you put that, and I would say, the most important notion I can kind of offer is that what you talked about was like your presence with the past, which could go back to a place, Earth, and I think that's the real frontier. That's the real challenge for everybody is to actually care about what you're standing on, care about the water that's out here in the river, care about. And not people, because people don't really matter to you. The CNN news program don't matter about nothing. People's fussing with each other don't matter. And we have one orbiting planet that matters. And when everyone's gone, it'll still be spinning fine. It won't miss anybody. It won't miss anybody here, and don't care about you. So how can you care about it? How can you relate to it rather than relate to people, or New York Times or anything with people to people? It's like, no, people to earth to people to earth. That's the communication that's broken. Of course, the tribe has it all the time. That's the first thing that happens. Even the pipe, they flip it around and give it to the earth first. Earth smokes, then you smoke. Always. If you don't do that, they'll get on your case. If you put yourself before the earth any time. So how do you keep that moving in that direction, and quit focusing on people and people, because they'll be gone, pretty soon. It's not going to last very long, but the Earth will still be here. So how can we honor this planet?
I think we have time for one more question. If not, I think that's a fantastic way to end.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to thank Edgar for your time tonight and for your work in this exhibition. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.